I was standing in line at the base coffee shop, half listening to two junior officers argue about whether the machine was broken or just slow when my phone vibrated in my pocket. I almost ignored it. Phones buzzing during duty hours usually meant nothing urgent group texts, reminders, someone asking if I'd seen an email they hadn't bothered to read. I stepped aside anyway and checked the screen. It was my sister. That alone wasn't unusual. Angela liked to text instead of call. She said it was faster. What she meant was that texting gave her more control. She could drop a message and disappear without dealing with a response. The message wasn't long. Don't expect me to care for our parents as they get older. I have my own life and family. I read it once, then again slower. No emojis, no softening words, no explanation, just a statement, clean, finished. I stood there longer than I realized. The line moved. Someone behind me cleared their throat. I stepped forward, automatically ordered coffee, paid, and walked out without remembering what I'd asked for. Outside, the air was sharp and cold. I stood near the edge of the parking lot, phone still in my hand, reading the message a third time. People always say things they don't mean when they're angry. This didn't read like anger. It read like a policy decision. Angela wasn't wrong about one thing. She did have her own life and family, a husband, 2 kids, a house that always looked staged, like she expected a realtor to walk through at any moment. Soccer schedules taped to the fridge, birthday parties planned months in advance. She liked structure when it served her. I typed a response, then deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. In the military, you learn early that reacting too fast usually creates more problems than it solves. You gather information, you assess, you decide. Emotion comes later if there's time. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my pocket. The rest of the day passed in the usual blur briefings, logistics, a meeting that could have been an email. I did my job. I laughed at the right moments. No one noticed anything off, which was fine. I didn't need an audience. That evening, I called my parents. My dad answered on the 3rd ring. His voice sounded thinner than it used to, like he was conserving energy even while talking. "Hey kiddo," he said. "Everything okay?" "Yeah," I said. "Just checking in." My mom picked up the extension in the background. I could hear dishes clinking, water running. Normal sounds, comforting sounds. They didn't mention Angela. I didn't either. After we hung up, I sat on my couch longer than necessary, staring at a blank TV screen that I hadn't turned on. My apartment was quiet in the way that only single-person apartments are. No background noise unless you make it yourself. Angela's message replayed in my head, not emotionally but logistically. Care, parents, older. Those weren't abstract concepts. They were timelines. They were costs. They were decisions that didn't wait for people to feel ready. A few months earlier, my mom had slipped in the driveway and bruised her hip badly enough to scare everyone. Nothing broke, but the doctor had used the phrase, early intervention and planning ahead. My dad had nodded like he understood. Angela had been on her phone the entire appointment. At the time, I'd brushed it off. Everyone processes things differently. Now the message sat there stripped of context, daring me to misinterpret it. I didn't respond that night, or the next day. Angela didn't follow up. No, just being honest. No, we'll talk later. She said what she wanted to say and moved on. That was her style. 3 days later, I took leave and flew home. The airport smelled like stale coffee and disinfectant. My parents met me outside baggage claim. My dad hugged me a little too tightly. My mom looked relieved in a way she probably hadn't meant to show. Angela couldn't make it, my mom said casually as we walked to the car. The kids have activities. Of course they did. At home, everything looked the same furniture, same photos on the wall. The only difference was how carefully my dad moved, like every step came with a calculation. That night after dinner, my mom sat at the table while my dad went to lie down. She didn't say much at first. Neither did I. "She's busy," my mom said, eventually not looking at me. "Angela, you know how it is," I nodded. I did know how it was. I'd always known. Later, alone in my old bedroom, I opened my laptop and started pulling up bank statements my parents had given me access to months earlier, just in case. Nothing dramatic. Just regular expenses, prescriptions, utilities. Patterns start small before they become problems. Angela's message echoed in my head again this time, less as a betrayal and more as a data point. Don't expect me. Expectation implied assumption. Assumption implied precedent. And if Angela was drawing a line, that meant I needed to understand exactly where the other lines already were. The next morning, I drove my parents to a follow-up appointment. Angela didn't come. She texted during the visit to ask how it went. I replied with one sentence. She sent a thumbs up and nothing else. In the waiting room, a nurse handed me a clipboard with forms to sign. I didn't hesitate. I filled them out neatly, legibly, like I'd done 100 times before in different contexts. Name, relationship, emergency contact. I paused briefly at that last one. Angela's name was still there, printed in faded ink. I crossed it out and wrote mine instead. No announcement, no argument, just a small correction. On the drive home, my dad dozed in the passenger seat. My mom stared out the window, quiet, but calmer than she'd been in weeks. I focused on the road, on the lines dividing lanes, on the rules everyone pretended to follow. Back at the house, I helped my mom organize paperwork she'd been putting off. Insurance letters, medical summaries, a stack of unopened envelopes that had been sitting on the counter like a silent accusation. This wasn't about stepping up. I'd been doing that for years. This was about recognizing that someone else had stepped out. That night after my parents went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open and my phone face down beside it. I didn't open Angela's message again. I didn't need to. I started making a list. Not emotional, not dramatic, just names, dates, responsibilities. The kind of list that doesn't ask permission. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I took a sip of coffee that had gone cold and didn't bother reheating it. There were better uses of my time. The pen felt heavier than it should have when I capped it and set it down next to the stack of forms. I slid the papers into a folder, squared the edges, and stood up from the kitchen table. My back ached in that dull, familiar way that comes from standing too long without noticing it. By mid-morning, the house was already in motion. My mom moved slowly from room to room, narrating what she was doing out of habit, more than necessity. My dad sat in his recliner, the TV on low, one hand, wrapped around a mug he'd forgotten to drink from. I checked my phone. No messages from Angela. We had a schedule now, even if no one had officially called it that. Mondays and Thursdays were appointments. Wednesdays were pharmacy runs, groceries whenever someone remembered to write a list. None of it was complicated. It just required someone to actually do it. That someone was me. At the doctor's office, the receptionist greeted us by name. That shouldn't have bothered me, but it did. Familiarity meant frequency. Frequency meant consistency. Consistency meant expectation. "Is your sister joining you today?" the nurse asked as she led us down the hallway. "No," I said. "Just me." She nodded and made a note without looking up, like she'd already adjusted her assumptions. While my parents were in the exam room, I stood in the hallway scrolling through emails from work, answering what I could. I'd told my command I was on leave, but leave didn't mean the world stopped. It just meant I handled things quietly. Angela texted while we were waiting on lab results. "How are they?" I typed a response. "They're stable. Follow up in 6 weeks." She replied almost immediately. "Good. Let me know if anything changes." I stared at the message longer than necessary, then put my phone away. In the parking lot afterward, my mom apologized for being tired. My dad apologized for walking slowly. I told them both it was fine, because it was easier than unpacking the reality that neither of them had done anything wrong. That afternoon, I stopped by the bank. I hadn't planned to. It was just there on the way back from the pharmacy, the familiar brick building with the flag out front. My parents had banked there for decades. I'd been added to the account a while back just in case. At the time, it felt precautionary. Now it felt overdue. Inside a teller I vaguely recognized asked how she could help. "I just want to make sure everything's set up correctly," I said. "Access, alerts, that kind of thing." She nodded and pulled up the account. We reviewed recent activity, utilities, insurance premiums, prescription charges. Then a handful of smaller transfers I didn't recognize. "What are these?" I asked, pointing. "Oh," she said, glancing at the screen. "Those look like online transfers. Probably family." I took a closer look. The amounts weren't huge, a few hundred here, 1,000 there. Nothing that screamed emergency, but enough to notice once you stacked them side by side. She printed a summary and slid it across the counter. "Do you want copies going forward?" she asked. "Email alerts, maybe?" "Yes," I said. "That would be helpful." Back at the house, my mom was sorting mail at the table. She looked up when I walked in. "Anything important?" she asked. "Just routine stuff," I said, setting the pharmacy bag down. She nodded, then hesitated. "Angela mentioned she might need some help with school expenses next month. One of the kids has a trip." I didn't react. I just opened the fridge and put the medication away. Did she say how much? I asked. No, my mom said. She said she'd talk to you. Of course she would. That evening, Angela finally called. Her voice was bright, practiced. Hey, how's everything going over there? Fine, I said. She launched into a story about traffic, about her youngest coach, about how exhausted she'd been lately. I listened without interrupting. She was good at filling silence. So she said eventually, Mom mentioned you went to the bank, yes. Oh, she said lightly. Everything okay? Everything's organized, I said. A pause. Short but noticeable. You know, she said, I really wish I could be more involved right now, but it's just a lot with the kids. I understand, I said. Another pause. Still she continued, it's good you're there. You're always so capable. There it was, the compliment that doubled as a disclaimer. I don't want this to fall on you unfairly, she added. We're family, we'll figure it out. I didn't argue. I didn't agree either. After the call ended, I sat on the edge of the bed in my childhood room and stared at the floor. Capable wasn't a compliment anymore. It was a liability. The next few days blurred together. More appointments. More errands. More quiet apologies from my parents for needing things they couldn't help needing. Angela checked in once or twice, always by text, always brief. On Friday afternoon, I sat down with the bank printout and a legal pad. I wrote dates down the left side, amounts on the right, notes in the margin, trip, supplies, emergency. None of the transfers were unreasonable on their own. Together, they told a different story, one where helping out had quietly become a one-way street. That night at dinner, my dad cleared his throat. I talked to Angela today, he said. I looked up. Yeah, she said you've been doing a lot, he said. She sounded relieved. Relieved. Not grateful, not concerned. Relieved. I told her you didn't have to handle everything, he added. I smiled. It's okay, Dad. He studied me for a moment like he wanted to say something else, then let it go. Later, when everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room laptop, open notes spread across the coffee table. I wasn't angry. That surprised me. I felt something closer to clarity. In my line of work, when responsibility isn't clearly assigned, the most prepared person ends up carrying it by default. That's not heroism. That's a systems failure. Angela hadn't just opted out. She'd done it quietly without confrontation, confident someone else would absorb the weight. I closed the laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned slowly overhead. This wasn't about stepping up anymore. It was about stopping the slow drift where one person does everything and everyone else pretends it's temporary. The next morning, I woke up early and pulled on a jacket. The house was still asleep as I stepped outside, the air cool and quiet. I stood on the porch for a moment, breathing in, letting the silence settle. Then I pulled out my phone and searched for something specific. Elder care attorney. The office smelled faintly like toner and burnt coffee, the kind that's been sitting on a warmer too long. I took the chair across from the attorney's desk and set my folder down without opening it yet. My hands were steady. That mattered to me more than it probably should have. The attorney introduced herself, asked a few neutral questions, and listened while I explained my parents' situation in plain terms. No dramatics, ages, conditions, living arrangements, who handled what. She nodded and took notes. This is common, she said, especially with siblings. I didn't respond. I wasn't there for validation. I was there to understand exposure. We talked through options, power of attorney, medical directives, what they covered, what they didn't. She was careful with language, the way people are when they've seen families unravel over small misunderstandings. When the meeting ended, she slid a checklist across the desk. This isn't urgent, she said, but it's better to be ahead of it than behind. I thanked her, walked out, and sat in my car for a minute before starting the engine. Back at the house, my mom was folding laundry at the table, pausing every few shirts to rest her hands. I grabbed the basket and finished the stack without saying anything. She watched me for a moment, then looked away. I hate that you have to do all this, she said quietly. You don't, I said. I choose to. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. That afternoon, I opened my laptop and started organizing the financial records I'd been collecting. Bank statements, insurance summaries, credit card bills my parents kept just in case, in a drawer that had become a catch-all. I didn't rush. I didn't skim. I went line by line. Patterns don't announce themselves. They repeat until you notice. Over the last 3 years, I counted payments that had nothing to do with utilities or medical care. Tuition deposits, equipment fees, travel reimbursements, always justified, always reasonable in isolation. I added the numbers up twice. The total made my jaw tighten, not because it was devastating, but because it was quiet. This wasn't theft. This was normalization. Angela texted while I was mid-spreadsheet. Hey, quick question. Did Mom ever tell you about the science trip fee? It's due soon. I stared at the message, then typed back. How much? She sent a number that matched one of the unexplained transfers, almost exactly. Interesting, I thought. I replied with a simple, I'll check. At dinner that night, my dad brought up the past. Stories from when we were kids, road trips, Angela getting lost on the way to soccer practice and insisting it wasn't her fault. My mom laughed, then stopped herself when she realized how tired she was. After they went to bed, I pulled the folder back out and added notes in the margin. Asked, not discussed, repeated. The next morning, Angela called before I finished my coffee. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time, she said. I'm up, I said. So about the trip, she continued. It's kind of last minute. I figured Mom could help since it's for the kids. I waited. She's been so stressed lately, Angela added. I don't want to bother her directly. Of course not. I'll look at it, I said. Her relief was immediate. Thank you, I knew you'd understand. We hung up. I didn't feel angry. I felt documented. That afternoon, I drove my mom to physical therapy. In the waiting room, a woman about her age was arguing with her daughter over who would take her home. The daughter looked exhausted. The mother looked guilty. Neither one looked surprised. I wondered how many people ended up here without ever agreeing to be. Back home, my mom dozed on the couch while I answered emails from work and finalized the spreadsheet. I printed it out and slipped it into the folder with the rest. Angela called again that evening, this time video. Her house was loud behind her. Kids shouting, a TV on, a life in motion. I just wanted to check in, she said. Make sure everything's okay. It is, I said. She smiled, then frowned slightly. You seem distant. I'm busy, I said. Well, she said we all are. That was the problem. We weren't busy with the same things. After the call, I sat at the table and reread her original message. I hadn't opened it in days. The words hadn't changed, but my understanding of them had. Don't expect me. Expectation implied obligation. Obligation implied consequence. In the military, if someone declines a responsibility, it gets reassigned. Not morally, logistically. The system doesn't care why. It only cares that the task gets done. Families didn't work that way. Or at least they pretended not to. The following week, I took my parents to another appointment. The doctor asked who would be coordinating care going forward. He looked at both of us, then settled on me without waiting for an answer. I'll be your point of contact, I said. My mom squeezed my hand under the table. On the drive home, she was quiet. Angela says she worries about you, she said eventually. I kept my eyes on the road. Does she? She says you take too much on. My mom continued. That you don't let people help. I exhaled slowly. Did she offer? My mom didn't answer. That night, I added one more column to the spreadsheet. Not numbers this time. Roles, who called, who scheduled, who paid, who followed up. Angela's column stayed mostly empty. I wasn't building a case. I wasn't planning a confrontation. I was doing what I always did when things stopped making sense. I was clarifying the situation. Before bed, I reviewed the attorney's checklist again. Nothing urgent, she'd said. That was true, but urgency had a way of showing up unannounced. I closed the folder and placed it on the counter where I'd see it in the morning. My phone buzzed with a notification I ignored. In the quiet with the house finally still. The cost of staying silent became clear. It wasn't just financial. It was the way responsibility had been quietly transferred without consent, dressed up as convenience. I turned off the light and went to bed, already adjusting my mental timeline. Already moving from observation to action, not because I was angry, but because the pattern had finished revealing itself. The checklist stayed on the counter longer than I expected. I passed it every morning, coffee in hand, scanning it without touching it. Not because I was unsure, because once you start, you don't get to pretend you're just observing anymore. I called the attorney on a Tuesday afternoon while my mom was napping, and my dad was out walking the block with his neighbor. The call lasted 12 minutes. No small talk. Just confirmations, timelines, and what documents I'd need. We'll need their consent, she said. Both of them. Clear on record. They're capable, I said. They understand what's happening. That helps, she replied. It doesn't make it easy. Families get emotional about control. I'm not looking to control anything, I said. I'm trying to make sure decisions don't get made by accident. She paused. That's usually how it starts. That evening I sat at the kitchen table with my parents after dinner. The TV was off, no distractions. My mom folded her hands. My dad leaned back in his chair, listening the way he always had when something mattered. I explained the basics, slowly, simply, what power of attorney meant, what it didn't mean, how medical directives worked, why clarity mattered more now than later. My mom nodded through most of it. My dad asked questions about specifics. Who could speak to doctors? Who could sign paperwork? What happened if I wasn't available? We can list backups, I said. It doesn't have to be just me. They exchanged a look. My mom reached for my hand. You're already doing this, she said. You just don't have the paperwork. My dad cleared his throat. Angela won't like it. I'm not doing this for Angela, I said. My voice stayed even. I'm doing it so no one has to guess. They agreed. Not dramatically, not reluctantly, just like people who had already been living with the reality and were relieved someone was willing to name it. The next day I scanned documents and emailed them to the attorney. IDs, medical summaries, insurance cards, everything labeled, everything dated. It felt familiar, the quiet satisfaction of order replacing ambiguity. Angela called that night. I heard you're meeting with lawyers now, she said, skipping any pretense of catching up. Yes, I said. Her tone shifted. Why? To make sure things are clear, I said. For Mom and Dad. That feels extreme, she said. Don't you think? No, she laughed sharp and quick. You always do this. You go straight to official channels instead of just talking things out. We are talking, I said. This is part of it. Silence stretched between us. You didn't ask me, she said finally. I didn't need to, I said. That landed harder than I intended, but I didn't take it back. So what? She said. You're just taking over now, no, I said. I'm documenting what's already happening. She exhaled loudly. You're acting like I don't care. I'm acting like I need clarity, I said. There's a difference. She hung up without saying goodbye. I didn't feel victorious. I felt aligned. Over the next week, the paperwork moved forward. The attorney sent drafts. I reviewed them carefully. My parents signed with witnesses present. Everything was above board. Everything was clean. Angela texted less. When she did, it was vague. Are you really doing this? This seems unnecessary. We're family, I replied with short, factual responses. No commentary, no defense. At the pharmacy, the clerk asked if I wanted to add myself as the primary contact. I said yes. At the hospital, the intake nurse asked who should be called in an emergency. I gave my number. No speeches, just adjustments. Angela showed up unannounced on a Saturday morning. Her kids stayed in the car. She came in alone, eyes already scanning the room like she was looking for something out of place. I can't believe you're doing this, she said, standing in the living room without sitting. Good morning, my mom said carefully. Angela waved it off. This is about control. You always want things your way. I stayed quiet, letting her fill the space. You think because you're around more you get to decide everything, she continued. But you're not even here half the time. You disappear for months. I don't disappear, I said. I serve, she scoffed. That's convenient. I looked at her, really looked. She wasn't angry, she was threatened. This paperwork doesn't stop you from being involved, I said. It just sets boundaries. Boundaries, she snapped. Since when do you care about boundaries? Since they became necessary, I said. My dad spoke up then. His voice was steady. We agreed to this. Angela turned to him stunned. You didn't even tell me. You didn't ask me, he said, not unkindly, just truthfully. She stared at all of us, then shook her head. This is going to cause problems. It's preventing them, I said. She left without another word. That night, my mom apologized for the tension. My dad apologized for not handling it sooner. I told them both to stop apologizing. Later, alone in my apartment, I updated my calendar with reminders I hadn't needed before. Prescription renewals, therapy appointments, check-in calls. I noticed something else too. The noise had dropped. Fewer texts, fewer vague questions, less emotional static. Clarity does that. It scares people who benefit from confusion. At work, I briefed my replacement for the week. At home, I filed copies of everything in a folder labeled simply Parents. Angela sent a final message that evening. You didn't have to do this like that, I typed back. This is the way that works. No punctuation, no apology. I set the phone down and went back to what I was doing. Not because the conversation didn't matter, but because I'd already said what needed to be said. Staying calm wasn't about being detached. It was about refusing to let someone else's discomfort dictate my decisions. The paperwork didn't change my parents' lives overnight. It didn't solve everything. What it did was remove the assumption that responsibility could float indefinitely until someone else drowned in it. And once that assumption was gone, the atmosphere shifted. Not dramatically, subtly. The way systems change when an unspoken rule stops being enforced. I slept well that night, not because things were resolved, but because they were no longer drifting. The first sign something had shifted came in the form of a voicemail I didn't recognize. No name. Just a local number and a tone that suggested urgency without actually saying why. I listened to it twice. "Hi, this is Angela. I need you to call me back as soon as you get this." I didn't. Instead, I finished what I was doing. The trash went out. The dishwasher ran. My dad's pill organizer got refilled for the week. Nothing in my hands required Angela's interruption. She called again an hour later, then texted. "Why are people asking me questions?" I replied with a single line. She didn't answer that. By the afternoon, the questions had multiplied. A message from my aunt asking if everything was okay. A call from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in months. The tone was careful, polite, just curious enough to be intrusive. I hadn't told anyone anything. Angela, on the other hand, had. When she finally reached me that evening, her voice was tight. "You didn't think this through." "I thought it through carefully," I said. "You went behind my back," she said. "You made it look like I don't care." "I didn't make it look like anything," I said. I didn't say a word. "People are calling me," she snapped. "They're asking why you're suddenly in charge of everything." "I'm not in charge," I said. "I'm documented." "That's the same thing," she said. It wasn't. She just needed it to be. She talked for a while after that. About how unfair it was. About how overwhelmed she'd been. About how this made her look irresponsible. She used the word optics more than once. I let her finish. "This isn't about how you look," I said when she paused for breath. "It's about how things actually work." She laughed bitter. "You really don't hear yourself, do you?" "I do," I said. "I just don't react the way you want me to." That set her off. "You think because you're calm, you're right," she said. "You hide behind paperwork and act like that makes you superior." "I hide behind clarity," I said. "Because chaos always favors the loudest person." She went quiet for a moment. Then her tone softened, almost tender. "You know I love them," she said. "You know I would never abandon Mom and Dad." I waited. "So why does this feel like you're cutting me out?" she asked. "Because you stepped back," I said. "I didn't push you." She inhaled sharply. "I had to. I have kids. I have obligations." "So do I," I said. "They're just different." The line went dead. The next morning, my mom told me Angela had stopped by, late the night before. She'd cried, apologized, promised to help more, asked why things had to be so formal. I told her we wanted things to be clear, my mom said. She didn't like that. "She doesn't have to," I said. My mom watched me for a second. "You're not angry." "No," I said. "I'm finished pretending." That afternoon, I got an email from the attorney. Angela had called her office, not to ask questions, to complain. "She's concerned about your availability," the attorney wrote, "specifically due to your military obligations." I read the line twice. Concern was a strategy now. I called the attorney back. "What did you tell her?" "That any changes would require your parents' consent," she said. "And that guardianship is a legal process, not a suggestion." I pictured Angela hearing that word for the first time. Guardianship, official, heavy. She asked about alternatives, the attorney continued. "I didn't offer any." "Thank you," I said. That evening, Angela sent another text. "This is getting out of hand." I typed back, "Only if someone keeps pushing." She didn't reply. At dinner, my dad asked if everything was okay between me and my sister. He looked genuinely concerned, not accusatory. "She's adjusting," I said. To what he asked. "Not being deferred to," I said. He nodded slowly. "That's new for her." It was new for everyone. The tension didn't explode the way movies make you expect. It spread, quietly, through side conversations and half-formed concerns. Angela started showing up more, staying longer, asking pointed questions about finances and decisions she'd never asked about before. "Why is this bill higher?" she asked one afternoon, holding a statement she'd found on the counter. "Because rates went up," I said. "Did you shop around?" "Yes." "With who?" I named the provider. She frowned. "I would have done it differently, I'm sure," I said. Her jaw tightened. "You don't have to be sarcastic." "I'm not," I said. "I'm factual." Later, she cornered me in the hallway. You're making me look like the bad guy, she hissed. I'm not assigning roles, I said. I'm responding to reality. She shook her head. You always do this. You wait until you have leverage, then you act like it's not personal. It's not personal, I said. It's structural. She stared at me like I'd insulted her. That night she left early. The kids didn't say goodbye. My mom watched her go, worry etched into her face. I don't want this tearing you apart, she said. It's not, I said. It's revealing where the seams already were. The following week, the attorney forwarded another note. Angela had asked about temporary authority while I was away. She'd framed it as a practical concern. What if something happened? What if I couldn't be reached? I stared at the screen. What did you tell her? I asked. That temporary authority requires the same legal standards as permanent, the attorney replied, and that your parents would need to initiate it. Good. That evening, I sat at the table reviewing updated statements when Angela walked in without knocking. I'm trying to help, she said, dropping her bag on the chair. You're trying to regain control, I said. She scoffed. You really think this ends well? I think it ends honestly, I said. She looked at me for a long moment, eyes narrowing, recalculating. This isn't over, she said. I didn't respond. Not because I was afraid of what she meant, but because threats only work when someone is still negotiating. I picked up the folder and slid it into the cabinet, locking it with a key I'd added to my ring earlier that day. Then I turned back to what I was doing, letting Angela stand there with nothing left to push against except her own assumptions. The imbalance she'd lived with for years was finally visible, and visibility had a way of changing how people behaved, especially when they realized the old shortcuts no longer led anywhere useful. I was sorting mail at the counter when the certified envelope caught my attention. Thick paper, official seal, the kind of envelope that never contains good news and never shows up by accident. My name was typed neatly on the front. I signed for it without comment and set it down next to the stack of grocery flyers. The contrast was almost funny. Coupons for cereal on one side, legal language on the other. I opened it carefully. The words jumped out before I finished the first paragraph. Petition for guardianship. I didn't sit down right away. I read the entire thing standing up, one hand resting on the counter, the other holding the papers steady. Angela's name appeared multiple times, framed in phrases like concern for well-being and lack of consistent availability due to military obligations. Concern had become paperwork. I exhaled once slow and controlled the way I'd been trained to do when something unexpected landed in front of me. My parents were in the living room. The TV was on low. My dad was half asleep. My mom was knitting something she'd already unraveled twice. I didn't bring the papers in there, not yet. Instead, I stepped outside and called the attorney. She filed, I said when she answered. I expected that she replied. No surprise in her voice. I just didn't expect it this quickly. She's arguing availability, I said. That's standard, she said. Especially with military service. Does it work? Only if the facts support it, she said. And in your case, they don't. That helped. A little. She explained the process. Timelines, evaluations, interviews, the difference between allegations and proof. It wasn't comforting exactly, but it was grounding. This wasn't chaos. It was procedure. When I hung up, I stood on the porch for another minute, letting the air clear my head. Then I went back inside. I laid the papers on the table. My mom looked at them first. She read slowly, lips moving slightly as she processed the words. My dad leaned forward, eyes narrowing. She did what he asked. She filed for guardianship, I said, over both of you. My mom's hands shook. Why would she do that? She thinks I shouldn't be the one making decisions, I said. Because of my job. That's ridiculous, my dad said. You've been the only one here. I know, I said. My mom looked up at me, eyes wide with something between fear and betrayal. Does this mean she can take over? No, I said. Not without a court agreeing. And do they? She asked. Only if they think it's necessary, I said. And it isn't. That wasn't reassurance. It was accuracy. Accuracy mattered more. Angela called an hour later. I let it ring. Then I answered. You got it, she said, skipping any greeting. Yes, I said. I didn't want it to come to this, she said. But you left me no choice. You had every choice, I said. You chose this one. She sighed dramatically. I'm just thinking long term. You're not always going to be around. I'm around now, I said. And I've been. That's not the same, she said. You could be deployed. What happens then? What happens is already outlined, I said. In writing, she laughed sharp and humorless. You really think paperwork fixes everything? No, I said. But it keeps people from making things worse. Her voice dropped. You don't trust me. I trust patterns, I said. And yours is clear. Silence. You're making me out to be the villain, she said finally. You did that yourself, I said. She hung up. The next few days were a blur of phone calls and forms. The attorney scheduled an independent medical evaluation. A social worker reached out to interview my parents. Dates were set. Checklists multiplied. At work, I informed my command, not in detail, just enough to explain I'd be handling a legal matter involving family care. You need anything, my supervisor asked. Flexibility, I said. You've got it, he replied without hesitation. That contrast stayed with me. At home, Angela showed up with a notebook and a tone she probably thought sounded cooperative. We should talk logistics, she said, sitting down like she owned the chair. There's nothing to coordinate, I said. The court will handle it. She frowned. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about, I asked. She hesitated, just long enough to confirm what I already knew. You're shutting me out, she said. No, I said. I'm not letting you rewrite reality. She slammed the notebook shut. You think you're so prepared. I am, I said, because I had to be. She leaned back, arms crossed. You think they're going to side with you? They'll side with the facts, I said. And what if they don't? She asked. Then we deal with that, I said, calmly. That seemed to unsettle her more than anger would have. After she left, my mom sat beside me on the couch. I never thought she'd do something like this, she said. I did, I said gently. Not because she's cruel, because she's cornered. My dad nodded slowly. She doesn't like losing. No, I said. She doesn't. The evaluation came sooner than expected. A physician reviewed records, asked questions, observed interactions. Nothing invasive, just thorough. The social worker was younger than I expected. Polite, neutral. She spoke to my parents alone, then to me, then to Angela separately. Do you feel pressured by either of your daughters? She asked my mom. No, my mom said. I feel protected by one. That was enough. Angela stopped calling after that. She switched to emails copying the attorney on everything. Formal language, controlled tone. Every message crafted like it might be read aloud, which it might be. One evening, as I organized documents into a binder labeled court, I realized something had shifted again. The noise was back, but it wasn't chaos, it was resistance. Angela wasn't trying to fix anything anymore. She was trying to reclaim ground she'd assumed was hers. That assumption had carried her a long way. Now it had limits. I closed the binder and placed it on the shelf beside the others. My parents were asleep. The house was quiet. Outside, a car passed headlights sweeping briefly across the living room wall. I checked my calendar. The hearing date sat there circled in red. Not as a threat, as a marker. In my world, escalation didn't mean panic. It meant the situation had clarified itself enough to require a different level of response. And clarity, once it arrived, didn't go away, just because someone wished it would. The chair in the waiting room was harder than it looked. I shifted once, then stopped moving altogether. Hands folded, posture straight out of habit. Across from me, a framed poster explained patient rights in bullet points that assumed people were calmer than they usually are in places like this. The social worker called my name. I stood, followed her down a hallway that smelled faintly of disinfectant and old carpet, and sat when she gestured to the chair across from her desk. She didn't start with accusations. She started with logistics. How often are you physically present in your parents' home? She asked. I answered with dates, not excuses. Who schedules medical appointments? Me. Who manages prescriptions? Me. What happens when you're unavailable? There are contingencies, I said. In writing. She nodded and wrote something down. The questions continued steady and neutral. No traps. No sympathy. Just a system doing what systems do when they're working properly, sorting signal from noise. When it was over, she thanked me and escorted me back to the waiting area. Angela wasn't there yet. That too felt intentional. At home, my mom asked how it went. Fine, I said. They asked questions, and she pressed. And they listened, I said. She relaxed a little at that. The medical evaluation happened 2 days later. Different office, different tone. The physician was older, efficient, not particularly interested in anyone's feelings. He reviewed charts, asked my parents to repeat information, checked comprehension, asked them what they wanted, not what anyone else thought they needed. My dad answered clearly. My mom hesitated once, then corrected herself. Do you feel pressured to make decisions? The doctor asked her. No, she said. I feel supported. That was the word she kept coming back to. Afterward, in the parking lot, Angela confronted me for the first time in days. You think you're winning, she said, blocking my path. I think the process is doing its job, I said. She laughed hollow. You really trust strangers more than your own sister. I trust documentation, I said. It's less emotional. She shook her head. You've always been like this. You turn everything into a checklist. And you've always relied on that, I said. Her eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? That someone else would step in, I said. Eventually, she stepped closer. You're acting like I planned this. I'm acting like you assumed it, I said. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. That evening, I reviewed notes from the attorney. The guardian ad litem had been assigned. Another neutral party. Another layer of oversight. It should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt heavy. Systems protect people by being impersonal. That protection comes at a cost. At work, I sat through a briefing without absorbing much of it. My mind kept drifting to worst-case scenarios, not because I thought they were likely, but because preparation required acknowledging them. I didn't talk about that part with anyone. The guardian ad litem visited the house on a Thursday afternoon. She was polite, efficient, and clearly experienced. She spoke to my parents together, then separately. She asked about routines, preferences, concerns. She asked me to step out while she spoke to them alone. I did pacing the backyard and counting steps like it meant something. When she called me back in, she didn't smile. Your parents are very clear about what they want, she said. They don't feel incapacitated. They don't feel coerced. That's good, I said. It is, she agreed. But understand this process exists because families don't always handle transitions well. I understand, I said. She looked at me for a moment. How are you holding up? The question caught me off guard. Not because it was invasive, but because it acknowledged something no one else had. I'm managing, I said. She nodded as if that told her enough. Angela sent an email that night copying the attorney and the guardian. I believe this process is unnecessary and emotionally harmful. I urge all parties to reconsider. I didn't respond. The next day, my dad asked me something unexpected. If this goes badly, he said, not looking at me, what happens to you? I thought about it, about my job, my career, my sense of self being quietly braided into a legal process I hadn't asked for. I'll handle it, I said. He nodded. You always do. That wasn't praise. It was observation. And it landed heavier than either. Angela started posting vague things online. Quotes about family, about betrayal, about being misunderstood. People commented with hearts and sympathy. None of them knew anything. That was the point. I stayed off social media entirely. The attorney called mid-afternoon with an update. The evaluations are consistent, she said. There's no indication of incapacity. That doesn't stop the hearing, I said. No, she said. But it frames it. I hung up and sat there for a moment staring at the wall. For the first time since this started, doubt crept in. Not about what I'd done, but about whether doing the right thing always came with collateral damage you couldn't avoid. That night, I dreamed I was back in training, standing in formation, while someone else read my performance report out loud. I couldn't hear the words, only the tone. Neutral, official, final. I woke up before dawn and went for a run. The air was cold, the pavement unforgiving. My breath came out steady, controlled. Physical exertion had always been the fastest way to quiet my mind. When I got back, Angela's car was already in the driveway. She was sitting at the table when I walked in. Hands wrapped around a mug she hadn't made herself. We need to talk, she said. We've been talking, I said. Not like this, she said. Not with lawyers and strangers deciding things. This isn't about deciding, I said. It's about documenting reality. She leaned forward. What if reality changes? Then the documents change, I said. That's how systems work. She laughed again, but there was no humor in it. You really think this makes you the good one? I think it makes things clear, I said. She stood abruptly. I'm not done. I am, I said. She stared at me, searching for something, hesitation maybe, regret. She didn't find it. When she left, my mom came into the kitchen, eyes red. She's scared, she said. I know, I said. She says you're taking everything too far. I'm taking it far enough, I said. That night, as I filed the last of the evaluation summaries into the binder, I noticed my hands weren't shaking anymore. The uncertainty hadn't vanished, but it had narrowed. The system was moving, slowly, deliberately. And once it did, it didn't care who was uncomfortable, only what could be proven. I closed the binder and placed it back on the shelf right where I could reach it without thinking. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. No dramatic benches, no elevated drama, just rows of chairs, a judge's desk, and the quiet hum of an HVAC system working harder than anyone else in the room. Angela arrived first, already seated, her back straight, hands folded like she was trying to look cooperative. She didn't look at me when I walked in. Her attorney did. Quick glance, assessment, move on. I sat beside my attorney and set my folder on the table. Not on top, not hidden, just there within reach. The binder felt lighter than it had weeks ago. My parents sat behind us, close enough that I could feel my mom's presence without turning around. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The routine of it steadied me. Procedures are predictable. Predictability reduces noise. The judge opened with housekeeping items, then summarized the petition in neutral language. Guardianship, alleged lack of availability, concerns about continuity of care. She looked at Angela. You're requesting authority over both parents. Yes, Your Honor, Angela said. Her voice was calm, controlled. She sounded prepared. On what basis? The judge asked. Angela's attorney spoke next, outlining concerns: distance, military service, potential deployments, the risk of absence during medical emergencies. It was all phrased as worry, reasonable, almost caring. I listened without reacting. Nothing there was new. When it was my turn, my attorney didn't start with rebuttals. She started with facts, dates, appointments, signed documents, evaluation summaries, statements from physicians, notes from the social worker, the guardian ad litem's report. Each piece was placed on the table, not dramatically, but methodically, a stack becoming a structure. The judge skimmed, asked questions, clarified timelines. How often have you been physically present over the past year? She asked me. I answered precisely. And when you were not? She asked. Care was coordinated, I said. In writing, she nodded. And contingency plans? Established, I said. Reviewed. She turned to Angela. Were you involved in these arrangements? Angela hesitated. Not directly. Why not? The judge asked. Angela glanced at her attorney. I trusted my sister to handle things. The judge looked back at her notes. You trusted her, but you're now asking the court to remove her authority. Angela stiffened. I'm saying circumstances can change. They can. The judge agreed. Which is why we evaluate evidence. She turned to the guardian ad litem. Your recommendation, the guardian spoke plainly. The parents are competent. They understand their situation. They've expressed a clear preference. There is no indication of coercion or neglect. The judge nodded slowly. Angela's attorney tried again, reframing. This isn't about current competence. It's about future risk. Risk exists in all caregiving arrangements, the judge said. That alone doesn't justify guardianship. Angela leaned forward. Your Honor, I just want to make sure nothing falls through the cracks. The judge looked at her. What has fallen through so far? Angela opened her mouth, closed it. The judge turned to me. You've assumed significant responsibility. Yes, I said. Why? She asked. Because it needed to be done, I said. And no one else was doing it. That wasn't a speech. It didn't need to be. The judge leaned back, fingers steepled. She looked at my parents. Do you feel capable of making your own decisions? She asked. Yes, my dad said. And do you feel pressured by either daughter? She asked my mom. No, my mom said. I feel supported. The judge paused, letting the words settle. She looked back at Angela. Guardianship is an extreme measure, she said. It removes rights. It requires necessity. Angela's face flushed. I'm their daughter, she said. I care. No one is disputing that, the judge said. But care is not the same as control. Silence followed, not dramatic, just final. The judge began dictating her decision. Denial of the petition, recognition of existing arrangements, recommendation for continued documentation and communication. I listened not for validation, but for accuracy. Everything she said aligned with what had been established. When it was over, people stood, chairs scraped, papers shuffled. The room exhaled. Angela didn't look at me as she gathered her things. Her attorney murmured something to her. She nodded stiff, then walked out without turning around. My parents hugged me in the hallway. My mom's grip lingered. My dad patted my shoulder, once firm and grounding. Thank you, he said. You don't have to thank me, I said. I know, he said. But I am. Outside, the air felt different, not lighter, just clearer. My attorney shook my hand. This went as expected, she said. Stay consistent. I will, I said. She hesitated. Be prepared for fallout. I am, I said. Angela texted later that evening. You didn't have to humiliate me. I read it once, then again. I typed back. Nothing was done to you. I set the phone down and went back to organizing the kitchen drawer my mom had been avoiding for months. Expired coupons, old receipts, things that linger because no one wants to deal with them. The house felt calmer, not because conflict had disappeared, but because uncertainty had. At dinner, my parents talked about practical things, doctor schedules, meal planning, small adjustments, life continuing. Angela didn't come over. She didn't call. That night, I updated my files, added the court order, filed it behind the evaluations, closed the binder, and slid it back into place. The system had spoken, not loudly, not emotionally, just firmly enough to draw a line where one hadn't existed before. And lines once drawn tend to reveal what people do when they can't cross them anymore. I didn't go looking for answers after the hearing. I didn't need to. They started showing up on their own like they had been waiting for permission. The first clue came from the mail. A thick envelope addressed to my parents arrived 3 days after the court date. No return address I recognized. Inside was a notice from a lending company I'd never heard of, written in language that was polite enough to sound harmless. Final notice before escalation. I read it twice then, a third time, more slowly. The loan amount wasn't outrageous. The interest rate was. My mom watched my face as I read. Is something wrong? Did you sign anything recently? I asked. She shook her head immediately. No, why, I don't think you did, I said. I made a copy and put the original back in the envelope. That afternoon, I called the number listed. After 2 transfers and a brief hold, a representative came on the line. I'm calling regarding an account under my parents' names, I said. I'm listed as authorized. She verified information, then hesitated. This account was initiated through a secondary contact, she said. Who? I asked. There was a pause. Your sister. I thanked her and hung up. That night, I pulled the financial folder back out. The one I'd started months earlier, thinking I was just being cautious. I added a new tab. Debt. I ran a credit check on my parents' accounts. Everything came back clean. No missed payments, no defaults. But there were inquiries, several of them, always routed through Angela. The next morning, I called the attorney. She leveraged expected inheritance, the attorney said, after reviewing what I'd sent. That's not illegal by itself, but it explains a lot. It did. Angela hadn't been asking questions about bills out of concern. She'd been monitoring access. She hadn't pushed for guardianship out of care. She'd pushed because her assumptions were slipping. When I confronted her, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I asked one question. What loans are you carrying right now? She laughed like I'd told a joke. That's none of your business. It is when my parents' names are being used as reassurance, I said. Silence. I didn't take anything from them, she said quickly. I just planned for what I asked. She exhaled hard. For life. It came out sharper than she meant it to. The picture snapped into focus. The house that was always staged. The vacations that didn't quite match their income. The private school tuition she'd never explained. The way she never panicked about money because panic requires uncertainty. She'd been certain someone else would absorb the risk. Certain the family would stay quiet. Certain the future would take care of itself. You counted on things you didn't control, I said. She scoffed. Easy for you to say. You don't have kids. I have obligations, I said. I just don't outsource them. She stood up abruptly. You think you're better than me? I think you confused access with entitlement, I said. She didn't deny it. Over the next week, more notices arrived. Not addressed to my parents directly, but referencing them. Indirect pressure, gentle reminders of deadlines. Angela stopped answering calls. When she did respond, it was clipped, defensive. At dinner one night, my dad looked at me carefully. Is she in trouble? She made choices, I said. He nodded. We all do. The difference was that her choices had been padded by assumptions that no longer held. Angela showed up again unannounced, eyes tired, movements sharper than usual. You could help, she said, skipping everything else. You know that, right? With what I asked. Just temporarily, she said. Until things stabilize. By using mom and dad as collateral. I asked. She flinched. I never put them at risk. You put them in proximity to risk, I said. That counts. She dropped into a chair. You don't understand how hard it is. I understand exactly how hard it is, I said. That's why I didn't pretend it would solve itself. She rubbed her face with both hands. I thought you'd always be there. I am, I said, just not like that. The truth sat between us, uncomfortable and immovable. Angela left without resolving anything. She didn't slam doors. She didn't cry. She just walked out with the realization that the safety net she'd assumed was a guarantee had limits. After she left, my mom asked quietly, "Will she be okay?" "She'll adjust," I said. "What if she doesn't?" my mom asked. "Then she'll have to change," I said. The next day, a bank manager called to confirm we'd closed a loophole I hadn't even known existed. No more third-party inquiries without explicit approval. No more assumptions. That evening, I updated my records again. Added notes, dates, conversations. This wasn't about catching her in wrongdoing. It was about understanding the shape of the problem. Angela hadn't been malicious. She'd been comfortable. Comfort breeds blindness. And blindness, when combined with entitlement, creates a kind of quiet damage that no one notices until the structure starts to crack. I didn't feel satisfaction as the picture became clear. I felt something closer to relief, the kind that comes when confusion gives way to cause and effect. Later that night, Angela sent a message. I didn't think it would go this far. I stared at the screen, then typed back. It only goes as far as the assumptions behind it. She didn't reply. I set the phone down and returned to what I was doing. The truth didn't require commentary. It just needed to exist documented and unignored. Once that happened, the story stopped being about intentions and started being about consequences, whether anyone liked them or not. I didn't hear about the sale of Angela's house from her. I heard it from my mom, who mentioned it the way people mention bad weather, carefully, without assigning blame. She said they're downsizing, my mom told me while we were sorting prescriptions at the counter, closer to the kids' new school. I nodded and lined the bottles up by color. That makes sense. It did. In the practical way, things always make sense once options narrow. A week later, a moving truck showed up in Angela's driveway. Not the big kind with logos and crews and matching shirts. A smaller one, local, budgeted. The kids carried boxes that were clearly lighter than they wanted them to be. Angela waved when she saw me across the street, then crossed over. "We're making adjustments," she said before I could ask anything. "Just temporary." I didn't comment on the word temporary. I'd learned how slippery it was. "Where are you moving?" I asked. "An apartment," she said. "For now." "For now," I echoed. She stiffened. "You don't have to say it like that." I didn't say anything, I said. She glanced back at the house. The windows were bare already, the staged look gone, replaced by something more honest. "I never thought it would come to this," she said. "I know," I said. That seemed to irritate her more than judgment would have. Over the next month, the changes stacked up quietly. Tuition payments stopped. The kids transferred to public school. Angela's car, newer than mine by a wide margin, was replaced with something older and louder. None of it was catastrophic. It was corrective. At dinner one night, my dad asked if we should help. With what, I asked. "With her," he said. "I'm already helping," I said. "By not pretending this is someone else's problem." He considered that. "It's hard to watch." "I know," I said. It was harder than I expected. Not because I felt responsible for her situation, but because consequences always look harsher from the inside. Angela stopped asking for money. That was the most noticeable change. When she called, it was about schedules, not emergencies, logistics, not panic. Once she asked if I could watch the kids while she worked late. "Yes," I said. She hesitated. "You don't mind?" "No," I said. "That's different." She didn't argue. At work, my life stayed predictable. Briefings, training, a promotion packet moving through the system without drama. The kind of progress that happens when nothing unexpected derails it. At home, predictability had to be rebuilt. The first time Angela came over after the move, she didn't comment on the files on the shelf or the lock on the cabinet. She sat at the table and asked my mom how therapy was going. "Better," my mom said. "Slower, but better." Angela nodded genuinely this time. When my dad mentioned a follow-up appointment, Angela took out her phone and added it to her calendar without being asked. It wasn't redemption, it was recalibration. Later in the kitchen, Angela said quietly, "I didn't realize how much you were carrying." "I didn't either," I said. That wasn't an apology. It wasn't meant to be. A few days later, she sent a text. "I'm trying to get things under control." "I should have done that sooner," I replied. Control starts with honesty. She didn't push back. The biggest consequence wasn't financial. It was social. Angela's circle shrank. The people who'd commented on her vague posts disappeared when there was nothing left to sympathize with. Comfort has limits when it requires contribution. She took on more hours, cut back on extras, learned how to explain no to her kids without turning it into a tragedy. I watched from a distance, not out of spite, but out of respect for the process. Interfering would have blurred the lesson. One evening, Angela showed up with a box of documents. "I need help understanding these," she said, setting them down. Credit card statements, payment plans, a budget scribbled on the back of an envelope. I flipped through them. "This is manageable," I said. She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. "You don't hate me," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," I said. "I just won't cushion choices anymore." She nodded. "That's fair." At dinner, my mom reached across the table and squeezed both our hands. "I'm glad you're talking," she said. So was I. Talking without leveraging. The consequences kept unfolding, but they stopped feeling like punishment. They became boundaries in motion. Angela learned which bills came first, which promises were optional, which assumptions had been expensive. I learned something too, that stepping back from rescuing didn't make me cruel. It made space for accountability. One afternoon, as I helped my dad update paperwork, Angela sat nearby reading over a lease agreement. "I didn't read these closely before," she said. "I just signed." "I noticed," I said. She smiled faintly. "Yeah, me too." The house settled into a new rhythm, not perfect, just real. Angela's life was smaller now, not worse. Smaller in the way things get when you strip away excess and face what's actually there. She didn't thank me. She didn't need to. Gratitude would have implied I'd done something for her. I hadn't. I'd done something for clarity. As the weeks passed, the urgency faded. The tension softened. What remained was a quieter understanding of cause and effect. And once cause and effect take hold, they don't require supervision. They just keep working one choice at a time. I was back on base when the call came in, standing near the edge of the motor pool, watching a maintenance crew argue over whose wrench had gone missing. The sky was clear in that dull, washed-out way that makes everything feel unfinished. I stepped away from the noise and answered. It was my mom, nothing urgent. That was the first thing she said, which meant it mattered enough for her to say it out loud. "Your sister stopped by this morning," she told me. "She brought groceries. And a calendar." "A calendar," I repeated. "Yes," she said. She wrote everything down. Appointments, school days, her work schedule. I pictured Angela at the kitchen table, pen in hand, actually planning instead of assuming. It wasn't a victory image. It was quieter than that. "That's good," I said. My mom hesitated. She asked if she could take your dad to his appointment next week. "That's fine," I said. "You have the information, I know," my mom said. "I just wanted to tell you." After we hung up, I stayed where I was for a moment longer, listening to the distant clang of metal and the low murmur of people doing what they were responsible for doing. Nothing dramatic, just work continuing because it had to. Back home that weekend, the house felt settled in a way it hadn't before. Not peaceful, settled. The difference mattered. Angela arrived early. She didn't knock. She didn't hover. She went straight to the kitchen and started unloading groceries, lining them up by category, without comment. "You got the right brand," my dad said, impressed. Angela smiled. I wrote it down. She handed me the calendar later, sliding it across the table. "I color-coded it," she said. "In case that helps." "It does," I said. She nodded, then lingered like she wanted to say something else. She didn't. We ate lunch together. Ordinary conversation. No references to court. No apologies. No rewrites of history. Just plans and adjustments. Afterward, while my parents watched television, Angela and I stood at the sink washing dishes side by side. "I didn't know how bad it was," she said, eyes on the water. "I know," I said. "I really thought." She stopped. Started again. "I thought there would be more time." "There usually is," I said. "Until there isn't." She dried a plate too hard, then set it down carefully. "When you didn't react," she said, "I thought you didn't care." "I cared enough not to argue," I said. "Arguing would have kept things the same." She nodded. By the time I understood what that meant. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Later, I helped my dad organize the garage. Old tools, boxes he hadn't opened in years, things you keep because you think you might need them again someday. Angela came out with a clipboard. I called the insurance company, she said. They had some questions. You handled it, I asked. Yes, she said. I had the information. Good, I thought. Not relief. Confirmation. That evening after dinner, Angela pulled me aside. I'm not asking you to fix anything, she said. I know better now. I waited. I just want to do my part, she added. The right way. I believed her, not because she'd changed overnight, but because her definition of right had narrowed to something measurable. At work, things moved forward. Assignments, evaluations, a new responsibility added without ceremony. The usual rhythm of progress that doesn't need to be announced to be real. At home, the rhythm adjusted too. Angela showed up when she said she would. She asked questions before making decisions. She stopped assuming access meant permission. One afternoon, she called to ask if she could switch appointment days. Can we trade Thursday for Friday, she asked. I didn't plan well. Yes, I said. Next time, check first. I will, she said. That was it. No defensiveness, no explanation. My mom noticed the change before anyone else did. She listens now, she said quietly. While we folded laundry, not just to respond, to understand, I nodded. That's new for her. It's new for all of us, my mom said. On Sunday, Angela left early to take the kids to practice. She paused at the door. I'm glad you stayed calm, she said. So am I, said. She smiled, tired but real, and left. That night I reviewed the calendar one last time before bed. Everything lined up. Nothing outstanding, no hidden gaps. I closed the folder and put it back in the cabinet, locking it without thinking. Some habits stick because they work. Lying in bed, I thought about how easily things could have gone differently. How a raised voice or a dramatic confrontation might have kept us trapped in the same loop, just louder. Staying calm hadn't been passive. It had been deliberate. A choice to let reality surface on its own timeline without interference. Angela hadn't lost everything. She'd lost the illusion that responsibility could be deferred forever without cost. By the time she understood what my silence meant, the structure had already shifted. The system was in place. The boundaries were real. And that understanding arriving late did what no argument ever could. It forced change that didn't need to be announced, defended, or explained. The house was quiet as I turned off the light. Not because everything was resolved, but because things were finally aligned with what they actually were. Sometimes that's the only kind of resolution that lasts.